Hi, everybody. I'm just going to let it run another half minute or so, just to see more people joining. But the webinar on the pursuit of happiness, no, the happiness of pursuit, even I've got to get that right, and about creating a dynamic balance in our lives, in work particularly. Sorry. I have got my colleague Megan on the line, and she will manage the chat. Angela, who normally is, unfortunately, her internet's gone down today, so we're just working with that. I hope you're all having a good Valentine's Day and you appreciate my Valentine image for this webinar, which I already had on record somehow. I think once I did a blog on Valentine's Day and about love at work, but in that sort of colleague love. So if you could use the chat, and perhaps, I don't know if people want to just say where you're coming from today, how you are, whether you had a nice Valentine's card or whatever in the chat. For questions, I'm going to have questions at the end, but you can put them in the Q&A straight away, but as they go along. If something is urgent, then put it in the chat and Meg will probably grab my attention if I don't notice it. But please, there's a couple of times I'm going to ask you for your opinions, so please do share. So I hope everyone is good today. Oh, there's a question in there already. Chat appears to be disabled. Thank you, Eric, for bringing that attention.
No, I am on that right now. It says that it's available, so give me a second and I will fix that for you.
Thank you, Megan. Hopefully, Eric will get that sorted in a second. Great. I will get going. Now I've got the we're having a right mess here today. Sorry for the bad start. I'm just trying to work out how to turn the Q&A off. So look, this is me. If you don't know me, I'm Nic Marks. I did a TED talk about 12 years ago now. I'm a statistician. I'm the founder and CEO of Friday Pulse. And basically, this is a very brief bio. I in the 80s, I did mathematics and statistics at Cambridge and then Lancaster. I then in the 90s did a lot of quality of life studies. I trained to be a therapist, which is kind of slightly left field. And I became a parent. 2000s, I founded the work that I'm probably best known for, which is at the Centre for Wellbeing at the New Economics Foundation, where we created things like the Happy Planet Index and the 5 Ways to Wellbeing. And then did my TED talk and founded this business in the 2010s. And then really what we're doing now is growing Friday Pulse as a team. And it's about measuring and improving happiness at work. So that's just a very brief intro to me. Someone else is saying I can't hear. I hope you're sorted there, because I think other people...
that's all sorted out and the chat function's working. So if anyone wants to pop in the chat, feel free to go ahead. Great.
So the American Declaration of Independence talked about, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and presumably women are created equal, unalienable rights, which are amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the expression, the pursuit of happiness, is very firmly in all of our sort of dictionary, all of our sort of idea. But what I really want to talk about today is, is types of happiness. And so I was going to create a poll, but you can just put this in a chat. But is your vision of happiness more like a beach or a mountain? And you'll see where I go with this in a bit. But if you want to just shove in the chat whether you're feeling more like a beach or a mountain for your vision of happiness, then please go away and put them in there. And maybe I can even open up a chat window for myself. No, I can't because I've got I'm sharing. But I'm seeing.
There's a lot of beaches coming through, Nick, at the moment.
Lots of beaches.
There's one mountain with a beach nearby, but everyone else is beach. Just one mountain come through.
One mountain come through. So normally I get, but in a way, the beach is more about the pursuit of happiness in a sense, but the things we can do in order to be happy. And maybe, climbing a mountain, hiking is more about the happiness of pursuit, of achieving a goal. And I'm going to tease out these two different types of happiness in some ways and what that means for us and how we create a dynamic balance between them. But first of all, let's just think a little bit about what is happiness. This is our dominant image of happiness probably now. This rather flat, yellow, slightly inane emoji. Now, like anything, it's got a flavor of happiness. We can see that, we can relate to it, but it's probably not got the depth of happiness. And in fact, I'm reminded of a story about Picasso. Picasso was traveling on a train, and this other person in his carriage recognized who he was and had an argument with him because he said, why don't you paint things as they are? And Picasso looked rather mysteriously at this man and said, what do you mean as they are? And the man got out a photograph of his wife, showed him the photograph of his wife, and he said, I mean more like this. And Picasso apparently said, isn't she rather small? And isn't she a bit flat? And so what is reality and what is this? So in a way, this image of happiness is really quite flat and yellow, but there is some truth in it. And I think happiness looks a bit more like this. So this is a really good friend of mine, Pete. And you can see in this picture that his eye, he's got wrinkles around his eyes, he's showing his teeth, he's got his head knocked back, he's obviously laughing. But it's much more depth to it as an image than this is. There's a lot behind happiness which is very nuanced and very whatever. So and that's effectively what I'm going to start talking about. So this is actually the first image of happiness that it gets into the literature on emotions and happiness. There's a rather garish photograph taken in the mid 19th century by a French physician called Duchenne. And he was trying to look at different emotions. And because he was using photographic equipment at that time, the image had to be still for a long time. So this poor guy that he worked with, he used to put electrodes, which you can see in this image here, in his face to make his face fix in certain parts, okay? And what Duchenne was trying to show was that there were different expressions with emotions. And Darwin was very interested in this. So Darwin took these pictures and he started showing them to people. So this is what he did. This guy literally did this. He electrocuted him and he got him into different facial expressions. So there was supposed to be fear, anger, disgust in these emotions. And Darwin started to show these photographs to people and take notes about what they did. So this is just some of his original notes, but showing an image of them, showing what people were answering with. And what he basically found was that people could recognize these. I mean, I find it quite hard to recognize them, but he could find they recognize different human emotions. And this was very important to Darwin because he was basically trying to say that emotions are part of our evolutionary story and that basically humans and other animals shared emotions. So he wrote a book in 1872, I think it was, called On the Expression of Emotions in Man and Animals. And it was a real chink in his armor about what evolution was about. It's written 10 years after The Origin of Species. One of the critiques of The Origin of Species was that, oh, but humans have a soul, humans have emotions, animals don't. And he basically wanted to show that we had a common root of emotions that we share with animals. And this becomes highly important to our story about happiness at work, which is that our emotions are highly functional. They've evolved with us. We've evolved with them. So basically, they must have helped us survive and thrive through the millennium. So this image is not what researchers have used recently, but this is more like what people have done. So this is a very famous image from the late 1960s, which the researcher who's still an emotions researcher now, Paul Ekman, created when he was a young psychologist. And he basically wanted to almost disprove Darwin, because it wasn't very accepted that emotions were universal. We had a lot of thing about cultural relativism through the 20th century, and, you know, quite understandably with eugenics and all sorts of things, there was all sorts of dodgy stuff going on, so people were quite nervous about universality. However, what he did was he took these pictures and he showed them to people around the world. He obviously started with students. All psychological research starts with students, but he then took them around the world, and people could recognize and name these emotions. So, you know, we've got surprise in the bottom left, anger, fear, disgust, sadness, and with a very nice gap in his teeth here, happiness here. And Paul Ekman showed these pictures around the world. He actually had different ethnicities done. He showed them to tribes in Papua New Guinea. He'd had very little contact with the West, and they could recognize emotions on people's faces, even though they had no mirrors in their culture as well. So there's very little awareness of your own face, but people were able to recognize them. And so this theory was also used, some of you may have seen this film, in Pixar's Inside Out. And really what Paul Ekman's theory became, and also Darwin's, was the idea that we have a primary set of discrete emotions inside us that are helping drive our behavior. They're functional. So in the Pixar movie, we had, if you know the movie, you had kids, then, you know, or you saw it yourself, because I think it appeals to adults too. It's basically about how Riley, this 12-year-old girl, moves from Minnesota to San Francisco, and she's slightly in emotional turmoil, and her emotions are driving her behavior. And particularly what happens in the film is a very beautiful journey between joy and sadness, and joy needs to learn from sadness. Basically what's going on. But the point is that the theory that Paul Ekman was putting forward was one of what's called primary emotions, and what those basically become are a list like anger, fear, sadness, happiness, could be joy, and surprise can be there as well, disgust sometimes. And this theory model, it's the neuroscience behind it is weak in some ways. The display in people's faces is strong. We see it, but it's not like one emotion has just one set of images. If we go back to these, these are very static images by actors. You know, our facial expressions are actually very dynamic. There's a movement in our face. So new facial recognition software is starting to look at loads and loads of videos online and try and pick up emotions. And they are actually finding that people, when they're at something like a wedding, are more likely to be happy. When they're something like at a sporting event, they might be, you know, in pain if they're weightlifting. They might be triumph if they've just won. But they can pick up these different expressions by basically trawling through the internet of videos that have been shared online. So we're seeing more and more evidence that absolutely we do have emotions that we express on our face, which becomes important for communication of emotions, but emotions probably aren't quite discrete. It's probably where we are, but it's a sort of like the difference between Newtonian mechanics and quantum mechanics. It's a helpful theory that works at a human scale quite well, but the detail is maybe perhaps a bit different. So these discrete primary emotions are typically split in between what we call negative emotions, so anger, fear, sadness, which are about avoiding threats, and positive emotions, happiness being the primary one, which are sort of about approach and opportunities. Now, the avoid approach isn't precisely right, because when you're angry, you actually step forward into a situation. So, but you are trying to avoid a threat. It's just you deal with it with confrontation, with challenge, in that way, rather than fear, which can be run away. So anger and fear are sort of part of the fight or flight mechanism. Sadness, as I slightly touched on, but was very beautifully done in the film, is a sort of about a loss. So Riley has moved from Minnesota to San Francisco. She's lost her friendship network. She's lost her ice hockey that she used to do. She's lost her childhood because she's moving into adolescence at 12, 13 too. So there's losses that she's dealing with. And that's why they did a journey between joy and sadness in it. So the negative emotions are highly functional, say anger and fear about fight or flight. Sadness slows us down. Grief is a natural process for us to reflect on things. But happiness, what is it about? It's about approach, but it's not only sorry, I just put here some ideas about what anger and fear deal with. So dealing with an injustice is anger. So when someone oversteps a mark for us, we get angry, a norm or whatever. So fear is a threat to our well-being, and sadness coping with a loss. But so you've got this functional element to them, all of them. And as I said, happiness is partly about opportunities, but it's a little bit more complex than that. However, there is a simplicity too. So although I've sort of said this yellow emoji is a bit simplistic, there is a way that this sort of works. Are we happy or not? And in this way, happiness is a bit like a good bad signal, that when we're feeling unhappy, we're not a good fit, Darwin would say, with our environment. Our environment isn't supporting us. We're not in the best place for ourselves. So we feel unhappy. Feel happy, we're a good fit. So there is this way that it works a bit like a good bad signal. And you can actually, I as a statistician, I turn this into data. So when we're working at Friday Pulse, we put numbers on these to say, how happy were you at work this week? 1, very unhappy. 5, very happy. So effectively, we turn the feelings into data so that people can track what's going on. And I'll come back to that later. But it's sort of, sometimes it's called in the sort of philosophy literature, hedometer, like a hedonistic meter that we're running all of the time. There are other ways that people put this into surveys. So YouGov do a weekly Mood of the Nation survey, and basically they just ask you, were you happy last week? So they're basically saying, tick a box if you were happy. If I'm not even sure they've got an unhappy box there. I don't think they have. I think you just tick a box if you were happy. So it's just a 1-0 variable. So the variable we tend to use at Friday Pulse is 5 points, but it's just 1-0. But this still creates, particularly at a population level, really interesting data. So the YouGov Mood of the Nation has been running since 2019. So it ran during COVID. And this was the first time I heard about it, which was a graph published in the 2021 World Happiness Report of workers' weekly happiness during COVID. And as you can see, when COVID hit, happiness fell. So this was a 35-40% drop in happiness. Don't worry about the different lines. They're just different types of job roles. They're not important really to the story now. But what is important is that just by tracking, are you happy or not, you get a really meaningful story about what happened during COVID, which is, this is pre-COVID, January, February. This is COVID hitting. We all went into some sort of crisis. And this is the return over the summer as we got used to lockdowns. We then had Eat Out to help out in the summer. And then the autumn, we had further restrictions as COVID reared its ugly head again. But this curve is something I think that all of us can recognize. You can actually look at this data. It's available on the YouGov website straight away. And this is the data since they've been starting. So they started the data collection in July 2019. Same data. This is COVID hitting in March 2020. This is the recovery. That's that autumn. This peak is Christmas. So Christmas is always a peak. More people are happy during Christmas week. You can see Christmas peaks here, here, and here. You can see this is the second lockdown, strict lockdown in January, February, March. So I thought that was the worst one for me. 2021 is in there. In this was more driven by fear. This is more driven by boredom, the unhappiness. Bundling along, Christmas 2022. This is 2023, drops and falls. This is, that must be Christmas 20. Oh, maybe that's Christmas 22. The Christmas must be somewhere here. This certainly is the Queen dying and the Liz Truss government coming in here. Oh, this is the Ukraine war. That's what that was there when Ukraine was invaded by Russia. And you can see here, we're still quite a bit lower than we were in January 2020, which was right up here. So we were above 50% there. We're now at 43. So this data, very, very simple data, is telling a story. In fact, that lower, I think, is the mental health crisis going on in the UK, the stress, the burnout. is reflected in this drop over that period of time. But it's interesting how powerful when we think of happiness as a good bad signal, and it still is, right? But it's also more complex. So it's not just a good bad signal. And so this is a question for you guys, which if you could write in the chat what you think, but what positive emotions do you think of as being behind the word happiness? So we use the word happiness very broadly in the UK, but you know, what would be a word that you would think of behind there? And I'm just going to try and see if I can see the chat. Maybe if I stop sharing, I can see the chat. Yeah, okay, so coming in, so I'll go back to sharing in a minute, but contentment, joy, comfort, joy, people, freedom, balance, contentment again, joy, love, good word for today, Sini, hope, family, safety, fulfillment, discovering, fullness, accomplishment. Lots of beautiful words here, yeah? This partnerships, relationships again, in a way, which is, these are behind happiness is a whole array of positivity going on. Purpose, another nice one, yeah? And I think this is really important for us to understand and unpack that happiness isn't just one thing. So let me go back to sharing my screen, hopefully. That will work okay. Yeah, I think everyone can see that. So there were lots and lots of words there. And, you know, the words that you were giving were relatively typical to the words I tend to find. So people can put things like contentment, joy. Sometimes we get interest, enthusiasm, love we had, safety we had, I think we had, you know, contentment. Sometimes people will say serenity, people will say laughter. There's lots and lots of words behind there. And actually, what I want to propose is there's kind of two different types of happiness. So if I reordered these words and sort of from a lower energy, contentment, love, safety, quieter energies, right up to higher energy, enthusiasm, joy, drive, desire. So there's different types of energies going on here. And actually, what I think we can propose is that there's two distinct groups of positive emotions. So there's sort of ones which are calming, caring, about contentment, and then there are some which are about enthusiasm, interest, excitement, drive. And this group of emotions is more about nourishing ourselves. They're reflective, relational, restorative, lots of R's words, renewal. They're helping us, you know, feel good. These are about striving, about achieving goals. And there's a dynamic balance to be struck between these. So, and probably underneath them, we've got things like stability, that nourishing is helping stability and striving is helping us change. And we need both of those in our lives. And I've just jotted down here that this system is more oxytocin based. Oxytocin is sometimes called the love molecule. Dopamine, the molecule of more. It's a very good book, actually, The Molecule of More. So our striving ones are helping us achieve things, and our nourishing ones are doing what they say on the tin, which is nourishing us, helping us feel you know, good in our bodies. And we need both of these. And actually, I think happiness is a dynamic balance between these two things, that we need them both. You know, if we have too much stability, we get bored. If we have too much change, we get unsettled. And are you about to say something, Meg? You turned your camera on. Nice to see you anyway. So there's distinct groups of them. And in fact, we can carry on playing with this tension. It might be you see more different tensions. So at the moment, I think many of you may know I'm writing a book. I'm working. This is a narrative I'm writing on, which I'm really interested in your feedback when we get to the questions at the end. But you can think of the nourishing ones as about stability, the striving about change. But they're also, if you understand, if you know the addiction literature, then they talk about the difference between liking and wanting. That often when, I think particularly when we get addicted to something, the wanting is stronger than the liking, and we can actually start going towards things which we're not even really enjoying anymore. The addiction is there. So for me, I'm not really an addictive personality, but food I can get to with this. I've got certain types of food that if I'm feeling down, I'll choose that type of food. They might not be necessarily the one I like the most, but there's something going on there with a mismatch between liking and wanting. You can think about it as being and doing. And if we get quite zen about this, or we get, chakras or whatever like that, there's a sense of us being present, doing the things that we do. There's often the joke, we're not human beings, we're human doings. Well, there's a balance between being and doing there. Pleasure and meaning is another thing we can talk about, which is that pleasure is tastier, meaning is in some ways drier, but is more about our longer term achievements and things, or contribution that we're doing. That could be another way of thinking about it. Open, when we're in a nourishing mode, we're much more open to bigger picture. When we're striving, we tend to be focused on our goals. That's an interesting thing about creativity. Creativity is more linked to feeling good and open than it is about focus, where we know what we're doing. We're not so creative, then we're driving towards something. Solid and fluid, maybe. I might be stretching it a bit here. Grounded and visionary. Consistent and creative. Restorative and driven. Present, nourishing is a bit more present, striving is a bit more future orientated. Hedonic and eudaimonic is a very classic well-being literature. In fact, I was looking back at a proposal I wrote in 2002 for measuring hedonic and eudaimonic well-being across Europe, which became a piece of work we did called National Accounts of Well-being. But if you look at that, I don't know if any of you in the chat want to write anything else, you can see any other tensions, but what I think these emotions are doing is that they're helping us manage these tensions that we have in life. We need to feel pleasure in our life. We need to feel meaning. We need to feel grounded and consistent, and we need to move and change. These are things that we need to do, and they're very dynamic, and they're going to be dynamic through time. I'm going to show some data on that in a second. But if you've got others that you want to write in there, then you can see tensions between them. Then that's helpful. If you I must admit, as I started to read them out, some of them I thought, do I think that? I don't know. But basically, I think life is a dynamic tension, and these different types of emotions are helping us balance that. So in a way, happiness is about creating a dynamic balance. And I want to just show some evidence of a new study to me. It's 2019. I've only recently discovered this study, which was a French study of daily mood with over 30,000 participants. And it's called Happiness and Social Behavior. In the follow-up email, I'll definitely give you a link to this if you want to read it. It's over 30,000 French speakers. So it's a big sample. They were tracked, their daily experience was tracked for a month. So this is just data that you wouldn't have been able to get 20 years ago. So using mobile phones, you can do this very easily. It's basically an experience sampling methodology. You're bleeping people through the day. And for this study, they compared two experiences in the same day. So they were looking at how experience one impacts what you do in experience two. And they had 220,000 paired experiences. So there's quite a lot of data in here. And what they basically looked at, so this is just showing the ups and downs of daily happiness. So these are error bars for those of you. So basically, they have very small samples at between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. So there's much more error in the data. Again, in the evening, you see there are less people, so the error bars get bigger. But that's a standard error of the mean. But basically, people are less happy between 6 and 9 a.m. than they are afterwards, and they peak in the early evening. I'm very grumpy in the mornings. Some people bounce out of bed, but I know I am. So that's a typical day, but this is a mean. There's going to be lots of things going on underneath that mean. And what they found here was, this is very typical, that this is the average happiness level. These are the very happy people. These are the very unhappy people. This is the amount of time they spent with other people. If you spend more time with people, you tend to be happier. That is a sort of classic finding, yeah? And in fact, actually, that's why, if you look at Pete here, he's happy. Why is he happy? Because he's with me. So we're best mates, so we're going to be laughing together. We're going to be happy together. So people are good for us. But there's something very interesting that goes on dynamically, which is here they're looking at happiness at time 1 and whether they're with people at time 2. And amazingly, people who are less happy, well, not amazing, it makes sense, that when they're more likely at time 2 to be with somebody else. So in other words, we're dynamically looking to raise ourselves out of a bad mood. So when we feel low, we seek out other people. It makes sense, really, that that's actually, what we do, because we're not just going to passively be unhappy. We're going to use that information in order to change our behavior. And one of the ways we do that is we seek out other people. But not all people are equal. So it starts getting really interesting. So this is the probability that they're with somebody else, a different person, if they were unhappy. So a best friend, a friend, more likely, probably because you've got more friends than best friends. Other family is a category which includes family which is not siblings and parents. So for me, that's basically other friends, because the only reason I would be contacting my cousin is because I really like him. I wouldn't contact my other cousins who I'm only, they're just cousins to me. Your kids, your romantic partner, siblings, and whatever like that. So that's who you contact. This is their boost to you. Well, look, best friend gives you the biggest boost, friends next, other family, kids. I mean, really interestingly, parents is a slight negative. They say in the article that most people's relationship with parents is quite ritualized. It's maybe even got some shame in there too. So possibly that's why it's going down. And strangers, perhaps it's not surprising that strangers don't tend to make us happier. So we're seeking out different things, and not all people are equal, but we're smart. We choose the people that are most likely to cheer us up. So when we're low, we seek out nourishing relationships. It's a bit like thirst. When we're thirsty, we drink some water. When we're unhappy, we choose to do activities which generate happiness. It makes sense. But also the opposite is true, that when we're happy, we don't seek out people as much. The opposite is also true. For the first to be true, it must be also true. And that's really interesting for us, because basically what that means is that when we feel good, we can strive. What they say in the paper is that positive affect states, i.e. feeling happy, can help in accomplishing tasks that have short-term hedonic costs, but long-term benefits, i.e. they're not particularly pleasant things, but we know they're good for us. This is when we feel good, we do good work. When we feel good, we can strive. This is critical, I think. You can put in the chat whether you agree or not. To me, this is critical to an understanding about the value of happiness at work, which is that when we feel good, we can do the challenging task, we can strive, we can reach. But of course, we've got to make sure that we don't get depleted in that too. And this is the dynamic balance going on. So we need a baseline of feeling nourished so that we can strive, would be my hypothesis. Just going to show you some data which basically supports this, which is, and there's different time frames because it's difficult to find data so nuanced. I've got some that comes into daily sales in a minute, but this is very good data on teams over a longer period becoming successful. So it's from Jim Harter from Gallup. It's a big study, again, 140,000 people, over 2,000 teams. So we're looking at success at time 1 and happiness at time 1, and success at time 2 and happiness at time 2. And basically looking at what's the relationship. So our orthodox model is that success leads to happiness. Well, they did look at that. So financial success, this is team-based data, time 1, did lead to team happiness at time 2. There was a positive correlation coefficient to do that. So suggestive data that financial success does lead to happiness. But they look the other way around. Does happiness at time 1 lead to success? Again, they found this, that happiness leads to success, but you'll notice it's twice as strong from happiness to success. So in this sense, teams that felt good could do good work. Okay, it's a very crude measure. It's just a one-off 6 months apart, but definite evidence that, when we feel good, we do good work. And it comes a little bit more in that order. I often talk about this being a reinforcing virtuous feedback loop that, happiness leads to success, which leads to more happiness and goes round and builds. There's obviously unhappiness leads to lower financial performance, leads to more unhappiness. So it's a reinforcing feedback loop that can go both ways. But there is some good research about unpicking why happiness can lead to success in the moment. So this is a very good study on happiness in sales. and whether employee happiness had an impact on productivity. It's done, well, who I know best in this group is John Emmanuel Deneve. He is at Oxford University, professor there. George Ward is one of the American universities. I don't know Clement Bellet. But they looked at BT call operators across the UK, 1,750 across different sites. They were basically having inbound calls. Some of you might have worked in a call center. I never have, but they weren't being able to do any prospecting in their sales. They weren't be able to use their initiative. They're just receiving calls. They measured happiness weekly, and they looked about how it impacted sales. So a bit more closer to experience. That French data is so rare to have it through the day. This is a really good study on productivity. We got to weekly. That's pretty unique, actually. What they found was that happier people sold more. It was I was expecting that slide. 13% more sales from the very happy to the very unhappy, which is a medium-sized effect. Actually, it's not a massive effect. But it's a bigger. It's still, you would want that 13% extra productivity. But they also were able to look at how sales were the same operator different weeks when they felt happy or not, and they found exactly the same thing, which is that when operators were happier, they were selling more. So when they felt good, they did better work. They actually could pick out the order of that, by the way, because they tracked how the weather impacted people's happiness, and the weather does have an impact on people's happiness. And when the weather pushed them into a happier mood, they sold more. So the causality is very clear, because you could sell more and feel happier, but you wouldn't then change the weather. So the weather is driving the happiness, is driving that. So it's a really good causal thing. So this is very good data that's showing that people who are happy sell more. But again, we've still got the why. Why are they doing that? And so this is really, the big question, why are they selling more? And this, we really get into what mood does for you, because the happier operators, well, they fulfilled their schedules more completely. So they were more compliant in that way for work. They worked a bit faster, but they did better quality calls. And actually, it's this last one that really reliably translated into more sales. The doing faster calls didn't particularly, completing the schedule didn't completely, but better quality calls did. And what they found was that there were different categories of calls. So some were simple order taking ones, some were more complicated contracts to negotiated, and then the most complicated were upgrades, recontracting, often with disgruntled customers. So the calls become more complex as we step through these. And what they found was that routine calls, happiness made absolutely no impact on their productivity. We find this sometimes with very repetitive work with no creativity. There's not much impact, sometimes a small impact, but not much. One of the unique things about these sale operators, or one of the unusual things, is they're not operating in teams, they're operating entirely on their own. So there isn't much, relationship types of happiness coming through. The contracts, the effect was bigger, but the negotiated ones had the biggest impact. So basically, the more complex, the bigger the impact of feeling good was on it. So in other words, they were feeling nourished, they were able to strive. And this is important because all relationships are complex. So one of my favorite evolutionary psychologists called Robin Dunbar, and this is a quote from him, he says, "Our social world is by far the most complex thing in the universe." Brian Cox says this also, human civilization is the most complex thing, much easier than quantum mechanics, because it's so dynamic and in constant flux. Keeping track of it and managing is very demanding in information processing times. So we need to be in a good place in order to give our attention to things. And that's really what's happening, is that feeling positive is helping us deal with complexity and challenging situations. Also resilience. Resilience is that bounce back, but it's also absorption, that when we feel good, we can absorb other things. Sometimes I'm guilty of this. I can absorb, snap. So if I get pushed too far, I guess I get too depleted. I can then no longer absorb. And sometimes it comes to a shock to someone, or my wife or something, when I suddenly lose it or something. But when she said, "You're so calm before," and then you're not, well, I should get better at signaling that transition. But basically what's going on there is I'm absorbing because I'm resilient, and then suddenly I'm no longer. And this dynamic balance, I think, is really important to understanding happiness in our lives and happiness in our work. It's about creating a dynamic balance. And this really aligns with the whole evolutionary view. This is Antonio Damasio, a very famous neuroscientist, evolutionary psychologist. He talks about emotion helping us monitor our environment, how we're doing, motivates us to action, and helps us adjust our behaviors. It's a dynamic process about what's going on. And I'm realizing I'm talking a lot, and I think we should go to questions quite soon. And I've got a bit more to say. I'll try and go for just another 3 or 4 minutes. And
there's a question in the chat box that came up a second ago, Nick, which was, what if sales went up because of the buyers were happier because of the weather? So going on from what you were talking about just then.
So the buyers feeling good may help them deal with complexity better. So when we feel good, we're able to deal with change better. So the weather was just making them happier because we feel better when the sun shines. But then that positivity they had enabled them to do their work better. So if they come in miserable and grey, like the British weather sometimes, they're less likely to do good work. So that was the causality paths going through. Ask a supplementary question if I haven't quite answered it. Feeling supports survival and thriving. Scientists call this maintaining homeostasis. Very quickly, life is a membrane, which might sound weird, but life happens inside, outside is not life. And one of the things that single cell organisms and we do is you're maintaining balance inside the organism. And you're doing that by dynamically exchanging behavior and resources with the outside world. So this is the same for humans as it is for single cell organisms. And we have lots of bodily systems that are always having to be in balance. So we've got things like temperature, blood sugar, we've got drives like hunger and thirst. And what I'm going to say is that effectively, I think that nourishing is like a thirst. When we feel depleted, we feel like we need to reach out for a relationship. So happiness, that sort of good bad signal, is helping us maintain balance. They call it homeostasis. Just like temperature has to be in a range, blood sugar has to be. I would even go as far as to suggest happiness does, because if you're happy all the time, you're dysfunctional in a way. When you actually want to be in a balance there. And that's what happened in the French study, is people sacrificed some short-term pleasure in order to achieve something they needed to do. Oh, I've got too many slides here, Megan. I've been too enthusiastic about trying out this thing. One of the ways you can think about it is like a steam engine, which is that it's always maintaining balance here. This is called a governor. A governor is a feedback mechanism. Basically, it controls the mechanism and optimizes functioning. When there's too much steam, you reduce the power. It's a dampening feedback loop. And what I would say is happiness is like that. You're monitoring whether you're unhappy to happy, too much stress, and then you need to do things like reduce your workload. And that's a real-time feedback loop. So optimizing happiness is a dynamic balance between them. And so, when you're out of balance, and I didn't know which way I should draw this actually, but when you're out of balance, maybe you're yo-yoing like this, that's not great. When you're in balance, things are better. It's balance. It's not quite a zero-sum game. So you actually can do more of both, but the balance is really important. So just to say a couple of closing things. One way to deal with short-term stress, so short-term stress is when we're out of balance, is take a tip from smokers, which is an odd thing. But what they do is they stop what they're doing, they move their bodies, they go outside, they start conversations with other people. They do mindful breathing, which is they exhale longer than they inhale, and they relax, which spells smoker. And the idea here is not to say that you should smoke, because you can do it outside by playing paper airplanes or something like that. But that one of the things that we need to do is in our hourly, daily work is make sure we don't get out of balance. So if you get out of balance, think smoker, stop what you're doing, move your body, go outside, kickstart conversations, exhale for longer than you inhale. It's a signal to the body that you are at rest, because if a predator was chasing you, you'd be doing lots of quick breathing. You actually must be calm if you can exhale longer than you inhale, and you relax. So that's one tip for you. A tip if you're running teams is use Friday Pulse, because Friday Pulse basically emulates this. So you can alert you to weekly stresses so that you can build a happy and successful team. There's lots of slides here, which I'm going to skip, but basically it's just saying to you how you can use Friday Pulse for that. So finally, I just want to say in summary that all emotions are highly functional. There are different types of positive emotions, nourishing and striving. They help us balance stability and change, particularly, but other things too. Creating a dynamic balance in your own life, in your teams, in your families, I think is really important. And when we feel good, we can strive, and we need to strive because we need to achieve things. Smoke can help with short-term stress. Friday Pulse is designed to help teams avoid stress and do that. And it's a bit like that feedback loop that does that. So so that's really that dynamic thing, and what I mean by the happiness pursuit and creating a dynamic balance by that. So one last nugget which I found when I was creating a slide was that there is something that ties Darwin and James Watt together. So although they're 50, 100 years apart in time, Darwin's grandfather was James Watt's doctor, which I found out this morning, just Googling around about them. So that's quite interesting. So so that's the webinar really, which is, as I said, and I'd just love to hear from people, questions, chat, whatever about that. So or ask any other questions that you would like to. So over to you.
I'm not sure if there was any questions, but my Wi-Fi did go down for a little bit. So if there were any questions during the webinar that weren't answered, feel free to pop them in now and we'll make sure we get to them.
This has links to Maslow's pyramid of needs, which peak at self-actualization. Yeah, so Maslow is obviously one of the great thinkers in the 1960s and 70s. And his hierarchy of needs is very famous. So I think that, again, yeah, there's that nourishing at the bottom of his pyramid and there's the striving at the top. What I think Maslow even himself said as he got towards the end of his career was that he didn't think that hierarchy had to be in place all of the time. It's more dynamic. So Viktor Frankl, for example, will talk about how his meaning and his sense of purpose helped him survive the concentration camps. So the dynamic can work the other way. And I think basically all of the things in Maslow are in play. I just think the dynamic balance is much more real time. It's not like you go through a period of life doing these step by step. And in fact, I think most of this is supporting common sense. But I think the balance is interesting. If you're out of balancing, i.e. more nourishing, should you go and try and reduce stress to do more striving? Well, I think when you've got too much nourishing, I think you get bored. So I think the signal with too much nourishing is boredom. So if we go back to that original image I had of the beach and the mountain, I love a beach, but give me a couple of days on there and I'm going to start thinking about doing something else, whether that is reading something challenging, whether it's doing something else. But basically, there's a feedback from boredom too. And just to say that is that when I track boredom at work, it's actually more of a joy killer than stress. That people who are bored, it's grinding when work is boring, isn't it? Whereas some stress we can really cope with because we do have this dynamic balance between there. And of course, we have opportunities outside of work to relieve stress, which of course businesses can sometimes take advantage of by sending you home really knackered. But actually creating a balance in your weekly life is really important. So when we talk about work-life balance, I think we're talking about it on an hourly basis. That's that sort of smoker tip, which is that don't get too stressed in the moment. We're talking about it on a weekly basis. Don't get too depleted in a week. And we're talking annually and over several years. Don't get too depleted because ultimately you won't do great work and you also won't achieve very much.
We've got a question in the Q&A if you're ready for that one as well.
Yeah, I've just found that one. Perfect. So please do ask more in the chat or the Q&A. I think we can skip between both of them. how would you compare and contrast emotions, feelings, and happiness, Eric? That's a question that gets debated. I mean, what is an emotion? So I'm writing a chapter on what is happiness at the moment, and it's like psychologists don't even really agree what emotions are. This is the way I think about it: is that we've got perception, which is, what we perceive as sensation. A feeling comes next, and an emotion is probably interaction with cognition. So a feeling state is, an emotion is almost how we interpret what we're feeling and what we're sensing in our bodies. So sometimes our feelings are really out of awareness. So, there's all this research which is quite troublesome on feeling hangry, when you're angry because you're hungry, and how judges are more likely to deny parole before lunch because they're grumpy and hungry, more likely to grant it after lunch. So there's a way, and that's unconscious. So there's ways that feelings can, and it's called core effect is what a psychologist would call it, but basically when core effect is depleted, we make worse decisions. We get angry or grumpy or whatever it is. So I think I go that way. And then happiness, happiness is this word we use to capture that whole broad range of positive emotions. And it's elusive, and that's why I've started talking about two different types, because I think it's important to recognize that there's this tension between these different positive emotions, that not all positive emotions are doing the same thing. Functionally, they're helping us achieve different things. So there are ones which are about goal achievement and striving, and there's ones about, as I say, nourishment. And you could probably tease out more things, but I think that tension is quite a good one to hold, the differences between them. And there is a relaxing happiness to pursue, and there is a happiness that comes from pursuit as well. Yeah, so I think we've done that one. Is there a way of managing the balance when you don't have the availability of a lot of options that you suggested, i.e. smoker, like stopping what you're doing? Well, I think the thing is noticing the signal, Cindy, if that's how you say your name. It's noticing the signal, and then using your intelligence to do it. There's going to be different things that you can do. So, I think that when we feel down, then yes, reaching to talk to somebody else, whether they're in the same room with you or something else, is a good way, particularly someone that's going to cheer you up. If you're at your desk, just getting up and stretching your shoulders is really good, because when we get stressed, so I've actually been hunching a bit because I'm leaning forward to my laptop. It's been not very good for me, but stretching and moving, those are really, really, really good to help us do it. But because emotions and feelings are bodily, they're not just cognitive. In fact, this goes to the last question for Eric, that one of the differences between cognition and emotion is cognition doesn't necessarily have a bodily experience associated with a feeling. Emotion nearly always does. That actually we sense something in our body. So, and it works both ways. That if we're angry and we don't act on it, we're likely to get stressed because we're going to be holding that tension. So it's a lot. Yes, it's a lot of posture. Why we can get tense in the neck too, but sometimes it's emotions. So the balance there is for us to seek out. And I think we'll all have had times when we've got out of balance, and that's no fun. That's burnout if it's really bad, but it's just stress and, not functioning so well. So it's good for us to try and dynamically keep this balance, and whether that's on an hourly, daily, weekly, annual way, keeping that balance going is really important. So, yeah. Are there good tips and signals to look for when managing working with others to help others manage this in the moment? Well, sensitivity, asking. I think that if you're a team leader, it's not an easy job. As Robin Dunbar says, relationships are the most complex thing that we do. And listening goes a long way. In fact, I've just started, in fact, it's in the field at the moment, to do a new survey of happiness in the UK. It's partly for our benchmarks at Friday Pulse, which we're updating. But I've inserted a question in there about what were the qualities of your best manager that you've ever had. And I've just seen the first 60 responses, and they're all empathy, listening, empowering me, mentoring. They're all about the soft skills. And so leading a team is really, the people side of it is absolutely about having good soft skills. So asking people how they are. I mean, basically, at the end of the day, Friday Pulse is a tool that asks in a formal, structured way how team members are feeling every week, so that you have data to act on it. So just like the governor with James Watt's steam engine, if you ask, you can have the data that you can then pick up and use. Now, before you go, Megan's got just a very quick question for you, Megan, if you can do that.
Yeah, I'm going to launch the poll now.
Yeah, so if you could just do this poll, but do ask me another question, but this is just something that we track for each one to know whether I'm hitting the mark or not. So please do answer that for us so that we can see. I will be sending a follow-up email later this week to you, which will have a link to watch a recording of this, and it will have a little bit of summary about it. And you can, of course, share that with other people if you want to, but do encourage them to come to future webinars too. And I tend to do one once a month, quite often in partnership with somebody else. If you've got any comments, more comments about the dynamic balance, I'd really appreciate it, because if you think of something that you've read that I might like, because I'm trying to write about this. And one of the reasons that I did a webinar on this is because it's hard writing about something, because you sort of, I find this as someone, I talk a lot, and I like talking, and the ideas are playful, but when you write, you have to commit to them. So it's something I'm trying to really get down to something which is useful. In the end of the day, I really want to write something which is useful and helpful for people for getting insights. Yeah. Cindy, what's the impact of neurodiversity on this balance? I have no idea, but I would think so. I would think that people probably have different balance points and different tolerances about the balance between what they need for nourishment and what they need for striving. Neurally diverse people possibly strive more than nourishing. I don't know, and I don't know what the impact is on that. It's a good question to which I don't have a good answer. If you have something for me, then do send it me, please. I do not know Professor Pieter Demsat, but I'm interested. Design for emotions is interesting. I think, are you talking about physical design there, David, or are you talking about designing experiences? Paul Dolan's quite good on this. What's it called? Happiness by Design. Paul Dolan talks about the tension between pleasure and meaning. Possibly could have mentioned that the ancient Greeks talked about that too, but again, I think he's talking about the short term and the long term things. But there's a lot of very, very interesting work going on in this area. It's very rapidly increasing. Yeah, so Tracy, please introduce me to people if you'd like to. Yeah, so industrial design engineering. Okay, I once used to work with someone called Professor Felicia Hubbard at Cambridge, and Felicia was registered blind, and she used to do very funny things about how poorly things were designed for people who are who can't see, and how it made them very unhappy, and that wasn't even her level. So design is really, really important. There is a delight in a beautiful design, actually. So yeah. I'd be very interested, Cindy, if about that, about the different aspects of the balance that may be more or less relevant. And actually, for all of you, if the bits of it that felt more relevant and bits that felt less relevant, again, I'd be super interested in that. So when I send out an email, please do reply to me and let me know anything you want to. We're pretty much on the time for 5 o'clock. I'm very happy to answer more questions if anyone else has got another question. But I wish you a happy Valentine's evening, and just to have a good month and a good year. I'm personally happier sitting here in Britain that spring is coming. That would be a big delight to me. I'm not very good in January, February. So thank you very much indeed. And yeah, do contact me on LinkedIn if you want to. I do post there quite regularly as well. And Friday Pulse is there for you to use with your teams. We do a free team version, which you can sign up for. You contact Megan for that. And we obviously sell to larger groups over 10 people. Thanks very much, everyone, for your interaction today. And I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, just challenge me on this narrative. If you feel it's not working for you, please do say so. Thanks very much indeed, everyone. Have a great day.